with what actually happened. So here's some of the video. On Saturday, there was something called Unite the Right. Unite the Right was an event organized by people like Richard Spencer. A bunch of white supremacists decide that they are going to, or white separatists, white nationalists decide they're going to put together this march in Charlottesville, Virginia. And they get, I guess, about 1,000 people to show up on Friday night. They have a torchlight parade holding tiki torches, and it's a bunch of nerdy losers who have never been laid in their lives showing up to talk about how black people are awful, and they think this makes them cool. They did that on Friday night. And then in Charlottesville the next day, they were doing a march, and things take a turn for the worse because Antifa shows up. And some of the protesters, I'm sure, are people who are not Antifa. They just want to protest the white supremacy, the white supremacism that they're seeing on display. And some of the people definitely are Antifa. The violent people are Antifa. It's sort of like what happened at Berkeley when Milo Yiannopoulos spoke there. You had some leftist protesters who showed up, and then Antifa came in and decided to make the whole thing violent. We've seen this sort of thing happen all over the country. So that's nothing new. Okay, we saw that happen at Berkeley, and we've had on people on the show who were victims of that violence in Berkeley. We've seen it happen in Sacramento, California. We saw it happen in Seattle again over the weekend. So we're going to show you some of this footage. So here is a little bit of the video of Antifa getting violent in Charlottesville on Saturday. So you can see that it's hard to tell which protesters are which. Some of the white supremacists carrying Confederate flags. I guess some of them had Nazi flags. Just disgusting people walking down the street, and some media members. And then you're going to see, in just a second, some Antifa people in the far left of your screen jump into action, and now everybody's pounding on each other. People swinging flags at each other, a girl getting hit, and her going after a guy. So, and turns into a melee. First thing that you do have to ask here is, where the hell are the police? Where the hell are the police? I mean, this is a legitimate question to be asking at this point. You know, we've seen these sorts of violence incidents break out. Again, they did in Seattle over the weekend, too. We'll show you some tape of that. They've been breaking out all over the country, and the police seem to either be overwhelmed or to have stand-down orders. I don't know where the governor of Virginia is knowing this is going on, but this is a situation where the National Guard should be there. Listen. The alt-right is disgusting, awful. Okay, I've been spending a year. I was the #1 target of the alt-right last year in the journalistic community. I received over 8,000 nasty, anti-Semitic, racist tweets directed at me in the middle of last year's election cycle, specifically because I was anti-alt-right. And they still have a right to speak, and they still have a right to march, and they should be protected by the police. So I don't know where the police are in any of this. But what's funny is that you can see Antifa jumping into action and getting violent. The left has tried to suggest that Antifa was not involved in the violence in any way. Now, Antifa being involved in the violence does not justify either the perspective or the violence you're going to see from the alt-right. Okay, none of that justifies any of this. But it would be remiss, factually speaking, to pretend that Antifa was not involved in this. Antifa is a communist group. Antifa is basically a bunch of Reds fighting a bunch of brown shirts. So we're now having a replay of the Weimar Republic, Reds versus brown shirts on America's streets. One of the things that was amazing is that a reporter for the New York Times acknowledged as much. A reporter from the New York Times, Cheryl Gay Stolberg, she tweeted out, the hard right seemed as hate-filled, the hard left seemed as hate-filled as alt-right. I saw club-wielding Antifa beating white nationalists being led out of the park. Okay, and a bunch of people on the left then hit her, and they said, well, they weren't hate-filled. They weren't hate-filled. And she retracted, and she said, oh, they weren't hate-filled. They were just violent. Okay, no, they can be hate-filled too. And that is a New York Times reporter saying all that. Okay, so you can see some of the violence, it looks like, was launched by Antifa, but some of the violence, obviously, was coming from the white supremacists, too. Here's some of the white supremacists getting violent. I guess this is another point during this march. You can see the white supremacist guy charging into the crowd. People hitting each other. You can tell the white supremacists because they're carrying this this shield, this kind of white supremacist shield. It's a white shield with a black cross on it. People beating the hell out of each other. Folks in Confederate flags and all the rest of this. Okay, and now you can see. Okay, so that's enough of that one. We can also see that some of the people who were arrested in Charlottesville were members of the left. So again, I'm trying to point out that the violence at the beginning was on both sides. Then we'll get to the actual murder. Okay, so the violence was on both sides in this particular instance. That's not to say that people who are anti-white supremacy are the same morally as people who are white supremacists. They're not. And it's also not to say that Reds are the same as everybody who's in the crowd, because that's not true either. But it is fair to say that violence on all sides is not appropriate in a civilized society. Here is clip 26. There's one of the guys arrested in Charlottesville was a counter-protester who punched a female reporter.
Lauren, I'm sorry, please put that away. I understand, can you please put that away? Hey, look.
Okay, so you can't really see much there, but the woman who's holding the camera is a reporter, and she's socked in the head by one of the Antifa, presumably counter-protesters. This is not rare, okay? So to pretend that the left is not violent in these situations it's just dishonest, okay? So you can see that the Charlottesville organizer, right? People were celebrating this, but the organizer of this Charlottesville march, he was doing a press conference on Saturday after all of this, and he was punched in the face and chased off the grounds. Where are the cops for all of this? There he is, this twerp, right, getting chased off the grounds. And then you'll see someone come in and clock him. Okay, so they chase him away. Again, is any of that justified in a civilized society? No, it really is not. This guy's a piece of crap. That doesn't mean that he gets to punch pieces of crap in the United States. Right, there he goes down. Okay, so again, the violence. So again, the violence was happening from both the left and the right here. And by the way, it's happening across the country from the left. Okay, so in Richmond, there was a photojournalist who was covering another one of these rallies, and the photojournalist was hit by a member of Antifa. Here it is, clip 27.
We're here. We're gay. We fight the KKK. We're here.
I don't know if you're present for the whole like dark report. Stop filming, bro.
We're here.
Stop filming.
So someone says to him, stop filming, to this reporter, and boom, the guy gets hit, right? So again, another one of these Antifa protesters who decides to hit a reporter. In Seattle yesterday, there was another one of these rallies. This time it was not a white supremacist versus red rally. This was apparently just a pro-Trump group that has openly disavowed any sort of white supremacism. And the Antifa protesters show up and start beating the crap out of people.
Let's go! Let's go!
The police are trying to protect the people who are marching. And you can see they're starting to be hit by the left-wing protesters. The police are being hit by the left-wing protesters. Okay, so this sort of stuff has been happening all over the country. The left has been ignoring it because they prefer to focus in on the narrative about right-wing violence. Now, to pretend that right-wing violence doesn't exist is stupid. Okay, it does. Okay, when I say right-wing, I mean alt-right, because there is a difference between constitutional conservatism, as I'll explain, and the alt-right. The alt-right is anti-SJW, but they are not conservative in any marked way, in any real way. They oppose the Declaration of Independence. They oppose the Constitution of the United States. They are not in favor of individual liberty. They are not in favor of equality before God. They're not in favor of any of those things. We'll explain what the alt-right is in just a second. So to call it right-wing violence is even there a bit of a misnomer. But, of course, the most important and horrifying thing that happened on Saturday was the tape we've not yet shown, and this is an actual tape of a murder taking place. This is a 20-year-old piece of crap alt-righter from Ohio who takes his car and rams it into a bunch of the protesters against the alt-right in Charlottesville. Here's the actual tape of it. Here comes the car. You see him. He actually accelerates into the crowd. 1 dead, 19 injured. And then people crowd around behind the car, and the guy reverses and comes back at 40 miles an hour down the street. Okay, 1 dead is a 32-year-old woman who was there to protest against these alt-right pieces of human debris. Just awful, 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 awful in every way. Just awful in every way. So, in a second, I'm going to explain to you what exactly the alt-right is, where it came from, why it's important, and why it is that everyone of good conscience has an obligation to call out the alt-right for what it is, how it got prominent. Because I think the difference here, what we're seeing now, and this is the problem, there have been white supremacists my entire life. Okay, there's a guy named Buford Furrow, who when I was probably 11 years, let's see, it was 97, I think. So maybe I was a little younger. Maybe it was 95 or something. Buford Furrow was a white supremacist who came in to Los Angeles. He scoped out the Simon Wiesenthal Center. I went to high school next to the Simon Wiesenthal Center. He scoped it out because he wanted to shoot a bunch of Jews. When he saw there was security, he left. He went over to the JCC in the West Valley, and he proceeded to shoot a bunch of people at the JCC in the West Valley. White supremacist violence has been a thing in the United States for a long time. Since 2001, there have been an enormous number of white supremacist attacks on people in the past few months. There have been an enormous number of white supremacist attacks on people. To pretend that these don't exist is to ignore reality. Okay, it's not to suggest that they're the only people committing violence, but who cares? That's not the point. The point is that there are a group of white supremacists who do commit violence, and they were always a fringe group. But now you're seeing white supremacists, people who hold that ideology, marching openly in the streets, celebrating, and something has changed.